Hi guys, in this video we are going to learn about the Spring Boot, right? It is the framework which is used for web application development, especially for Java-based applications, correct? And earlier we know that, right, we use the Spring framework, right? So Spring Boot is one more layer on that particularly Spring framework. All these core concept which we are using in 20 Spring, that is also we are using in 20 Spring Boot. So there is a lot of advantages Spring Boot provides, right? So we need to understand what are these advantages. So the idea is Spring basically remove all these, you can say, basic work to configuration of a project, deployment, and many such other things, right? You can directly start and jump into writing the code, or you can start writing a code for your business logic, or maybe directly you can start writing a code and deploy your application without any hiccups and without any challenges. So let's go and jump into understand that what are that advantages. So rapid development, right? In that scenario, you can directly create the project. You don't need to, and you can say add these dependencies, and a lot of dependencies you are adding into pom.xml, right? When you are building using the Maven, or when you are using or building using the Gradle. So that is his work is already gone off. Creating configuration of project, all these things are already gone off. So auto configuration is one of that base feature which is Spring Boot provides, right? It is configuring all the components based on your dependencies and based on your whatever property details you specify here, correct? And you can run Spring Boot application even though it is a web application and REST API, but you can run that application as a standalone Java application, nothing but you can run as a simple Java application as a Java class. Now, if you are just going into a layers, so Spring Boot provide the complete layer which is supporting for Java architecture and the different Java design patterns, which is very much required and very much useful when you are creating architecture of a particular application, especially for web-based application, three-tier applications where you have a web layer, where you have a service layer, where you have a repository layer. So for that, Spring Boot provides a different annotations, right? Like at the rate service, at the rate repository. So at the rate service, which is used for where you are creating a business logic, at the rate repository, where you will use and create that all these, what we can say, database integration and database, you can say, logic, how to connect or maybe read, update, delete. And there is a ready-made APIs are also there. If you are not creating any such method into a repository, that is completely okay. So your CRUD repository, your JPA repository, and there is other repositories provide a ready-made methods without writing any single line of code. You can use the inbuilt JPA facilities and you perform all these CRUD operations. Spring Boot modules also it is there, right? For you can say data access, for security, for you can say messaging integrations, and lot of other you can say modules Spring Boot provides without you can say writing any single line of code. You can basically configure that some of the properties and you can use the API and you can use these modules, right? Spring Boot starter projects, right? That is we have already discussed. Now let's go and jump into a next layer here, correct? So default properties, Spring Boot also provide a predefined setting, right? Which is helping it to you for application setup, and it will remove all your configuration overhead, right? You can also specify configure custom properties in your application.properties. And in application.properties, there is a lot of properties you can use it. You can also use in the form of YAML file also, right? If you wanted to configure the port database properties, if you wanted connecting to RabbitMQ or Kafka, you can configure the properties. If you are using OAuth 2 or any other security features, you can configure actuators. So these properties you can configure, and Spring Boot framework internally use these properties to perform certain operations, correct? Profile and configuration, right? So you can also define the profile, right? Profile in Spring Boot basically manage the different configuration for various environment, right? If you are using into development, if you are working into testing, production, right? So you can have an isolated setup. So that is the purpose of your profiling, right? And for a specific profile, you can configure a different properties as well, right? So you can segregate, you can say this configuration based on the different environments, right? Simple Spring Boot project, right? You can just initialize the project, right? And you can configure that which particular Java version you wanted to use it, what are the dependencies you wanted to add it. And apart from that, you can do what are the dependencies and modules you can add it, and that ready-made basic project will be getting created here, right? And Spring Boot main application class, right, which is annotated with the @Spring Boot application, right, which is the main application class, and the process will start from Spring application.run, correct? So there are different annotations. So one of the most important annotation which you need to understand, which is nothing but your Spring Boot @Spring Boot application, and it contains basically configuration, enable configuration, and component scan. So this particular class will help it to you for all these bootstrapping process for an Spring Boot application, and configure all the properties, right? You don't need to explicitly configure, and all these things you need to do. You don't need to configure all these beans like older way we configure into an XML, right? So that's the way it is helping us. Component scan annotation is helping it to you for basically scanning all these classes, which is basically treated as a component and nothing but Spring Boot basically creating an object, right, based on the information provided from this component scan, and you can say entity scan. @REST controller or @controller, these are annotations basically helping it to you to create a REST APIs or maybe a API layer. So whenever you annotate these annotations, means that Spring Boot understand that these are the classes which is ready to take a HTTP request and generating HTTP response. @get mapping, post mapping, and you can say put mapping. So these mappings are basically helping it to you for mapping and specify the path, so which basically we can specify that request mapping at the class level, and also specify at the method level, so that whenever you are connecting to an APIs, you understand that this is a kind of a gate method we are using, and all other details you can specify at the you can say for a function which you are writing it. Auto wiring, how you are injecting basically one bean to another bean. So we generally we know that, right, there is a two type of injection: setter injection and constructor based injection, correct? But here we have a ready-made you can say facility @auto wired annotation. You can use it, so automatically that bean is injected to another bean, correct? So that injection will be taken care by the @auto wired. So this is another facility here. Testing, deployment, and monitoring, these are also another concept here. Unit testing, so it creates a ready-made simple classes also when you create a project. So unit testing, right, it is basically you can focus, it has already create some of the testing classes, right? And you can configure, or maybe you can add some additional logic. You can create a, you can say the test classes for your web layer also, for your service layer also, for your repository also, right? And you can also test entire application when you are creating a test classes. So it also support internally with the mocking. So you can say JMock, and there are other frameworks which is provided from that, you can say JUnit, or maybe other testing purpose, right? So it is supporting that mocking as well. Integration testing also it is supporting. So these are all about the testing, right? So you can test the application, you can without starting that server also, and then with starting a server also. So there is a two ways you can do a testing for your Spring Boot applications, right? So Spring Boot test, that is the annotation you will see when you in the particularly a test class here, correct? So deployment of any particular application. So when you are talking about deployment, that is a inbuilt embedded server. Tomcat is there when you create a web application into an Spring Boot. So you don't need to explicitly clean and deploy. So all this work and the pathetic, or you get time consuming work, you don't need to do for deployment, right? So automatically it will deploy. You can basically use, or particularly what we can say, compose or package this application either as a jar or var, right? So you can see how you wanted to package it, correct? So this kind of configuration, when you create a Spring Boot application, you can specify. Also you can configure and change it into your pom.xml, correct? So that is also another facility. So you don't need to do all other work how you wanted to extract it. Is it a jar or var or any other details you wanted to specify like that. And you can also specify a different Java version, which Spring Boot version you wanted to use it, or which particularly Java version you wanted to use it. And it provides one of the finest, you can say, facility, something we can call as a actuator, which is helping it to you for production grade application monitoring, correct? So actuator endpoints basically helping it to you for particularly what we can say monitoring. So there are different endpoints Spring Boot provides, right? Maybe if you wanted to get thread dump, if you wanted to get health, if you wanted to get all these beans, and there are a lot of other endpoints it is available from the actuators, right? So you can also use get the custom matrix. So generally using this actuator, we also connect or provide this information to a Prometheus or maybe to Grafana, and then we can visualize that complete, you can say, data and whatever statistics we get it from these endpoints. Earlier we need to configure mbeans and other details to monitor the production grade application. So this is all about what we can say about the Spring Boot. You can also see uh, how this Spring Boot projects looks like here. So I will show you uh, my Eclipse here. So in this Eclipse, if you will see, so these are different Maven based Spring Boot project here. So different folder structure where you will see it is we are using JDK 17 Maven dependencies. You don't need to add any more dependencies. It is automatically getting configured here, right? And the sample classes also I will show it to you, right? So you will see like this, and here you can see different classes. These many controllers I have already created here, right? So you can annotate and you can create these many annotations. And like this, just creating a simple application class, which you can, the particularly classes which is available into com.adding a particular classes into some other, what we can say package, you need to specify scanning because component scan the classes which is available into a same package. So if you are creating into some other package, you need to use component scan or you need to specify a entity scan. Correct. Like this, you will see there is a repository. So we have discussed three layers. So this is a repository layer here, right? Sorry, this is, we didn't annotate at the rate repository. So this is the way you are not writing any single line of code. Still, this you will be able to perform CRUD operations because all these, you can see, implementation is available into your CRUD repository, right? If you will see customer service, it is annotated with that particularly service. All this custom logic or business layer I have written it here, correct? And here you will see the controller. So in the controller I have just auto wired this particularly a service class. So I have created a REST controller, and this is the gate mapping which we have discussed, right? So like this, you have created one of the APIs, get all customer repository. This way you can basically start writing and you can to create that Spring Boot application, right? So what you can do, you can come up here, right? Here, what you can say, right? Spring initializer, right? And the way I told you, right? It is automatically configure. So you, which particular Maven or Gradle you wanted to use or Kotlin, you can use, we can specify Spring Boot version. We are using it here. Let's say we are saying as a product service. Correct. In the product service, you can use it with Java version. So packaging is a jar or var. You can specify 17. We are using it. What are the dependencies? So we discuss about the different modules. So here you can display. So which do you wanted to go with the GraphQL? Do you wanted to go with, you can say Kafka, right? So you can use it if you wanted to use Spring Web. So for all these REST API, MVC or embedded Tomcat features you wanted to use, you can just add like this. If you wanted to use a JPA or if you wanted to connect with the Postgres, so you can use a Spring Data JPA, which is helping it to you for integration with your, what we can say, with the database. For Postgres, if you wanted to, because we need a driver jar, so we are using Postgres jar, or you can say generate. So it will generate that entire project here, correct? And the project you can basically is a zip file. You will see this zip file here, correct? So this zip file you can import it in your Eclipse. So this way you can basically what we can say, create that different microservices and different applications, correct? So annotations you need to keep in mind. Then you need to understand the bootstrapping process, and you need to understand what are the different design, you can say, patterns Spring Boot is using, right? So there is a lot of uh, design patterns internally Spring Boot is using, that is you need to understand it, correct? So you can specify into a comments then where you will use that Spring Boot and what are the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Also you can specify that what is the basically difference between that Spring REST controller and the servlet. Also you can comment it out that exactly what are the difference between Spring Boot and the Quarkus and some other frameworks which is Java is providing, correct? So these are the questions you need to understand, and you need to provide the basically answer into a comments here whenever you will watching this particular video. Thank you.